Best defensive line in America, they said. DJ Uiagalelei, we got him. We don't need Cam Ward, they said. Man, some Florida State lies were told during the offseason.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Safe to say week 0 was lit because not every underdog won, but they all covered the big spreads, and it was a crazy week 0. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC, a brand new mobile game that's completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. Before we bring on our special guests, let me introduce, of course, Kenton Gibbs. So over there, I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. So, Kenton, Florida State's opening drive, I thought we were set for a comfortable FSU win, and then Georgia Tech, they kept fighting. We'll talk about how it played out, but the Yellow Jackets end up pulling off a huge upset, 24-21 over Florida State in Ireland. How are you, sir?
I'm going to tell you, this is a wow. I'm struggling to come up with the words to quantify how bad this was. I'm feeling great because we get to talk about these things and I don't have a dog in this fight, but man, if I'm part of No Faithful right now, down horrendous, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, we're going to talk on this episode. We'll also talk about SMU nearly catching the upset bug, and they were almost 4 touchdown favorites at Nevada. SMU did escape. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about what Georgia Tech did right, but we have to start off with what went wrong for the Seminoles, and we bring in our very good friend Brian Smith from Locked On Seminoles. And Brian, so Florida State comes in with the most vaunted defensive line in the country. I kept seeing Pete Thamel posts on X about how every NFL scout is telling him best D-line in the country. Not off to a very good start. They produced 0 sacks and only 3 tackles for loss against Georgia Tech. What happened?
I think as well in tune with what's going on with the NFL draft as Pete is, he needs to expand his scouting measurements because whoever he's talking to, they need to change their boards after what I watched. And I host Locked On Seminoles. Look, they got punched in the mouth, as Kenton likes to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, 198? Something like that is what it was, 192, whatever.
Yeah.
If you give up that many yards, it's one thing. But here was the determining factor, because when they tied the game, I said, okay, Georgia Tech's going to try to run the ball, eat the clock, and kick the field goal, which obviously they did. They did generic stuff they've been doing all game long, and they had some shifts and stuff, but you'd seen everything by that point. This was a mano, and they nickel and dimed them to death down the field in 4-minute offense. At the end of a game, that is my biggest concern about Florida State's D-line. Like, you had a chance for redemption and got punched in the mouth. I was pretty angry about that. If they'd have hit a big play where receiver mossed somebody, those plays happen. That's not the way it went down. I don't have any remote idea of what the problem is. I know O-line, they have a good O-line attack. They got a lot of experience and all that. But, they were definitively better for 90% of the snaps. It was just – and they had no passing game. None. Here's a stat that I believe it was Stamel even brought up. 15 rushes for Haynes King. He only threw it 16 times, and they won.
Yeah.
That is borderline a stat that you would see with the old Georgia Tech in the triple option. Like, come on, man. That's Florida State shot itself in the foot with their effort. They didn't take Georgia Tech seriously, but this is still on them. Everybody is culpable, coaches, players, everybody. But if they don't figure it out real quick, any chance of going to the playoff or any major bowl, it's going to be in question.
With all due respect, I think playoff talk needs to go out the window. With this team and this loss, I say playoff talk needs to go out the window because it's not just that they lost; it's how.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Donno and I talked about this. We talked about a path to an upset for Georgia Tech. Donno and I have been around ball for, combine our knowledge here, you probably got 30 some odd years, if not more, worth of like in-depth football knowledge, not just watching. And he and I both agree, Georgia Tech's path to success is Haynes King flinging it around the yard, making excellent decisions with the ball. We didn't know him tucking it under the right arm was the excellent decision. It is mind-boggling to see that, number one, this game was a race to 24. That should have worked in Florida State's favor. They're the bigger team. Literally, they're just bigger than Georgia Tech. We didn't know that this game was going to be won in the trenches by a rushing game. I don't understand how Tofili can't get it going against the defense that was terrible last year. But Santucci, shout out to him. What a defensive coordinator. Yeah. Second year in a row where he takes down a top 10 team in week one. Elko might be having some second thoughts about taking Jay Bateman down there. And the third thing about this that's so confusing, we all knew that the passing game wasn't going to be what it was last year. But DJU looked completely out of sorts. He looked unworldly bad at times. Other than those 2 fourth down conversions on the game-tying drive, I did not see one big-time throw from him all game. It's hard to even comprehend what this game means for the Noles.
It was something I just did on my own Locked On Seminoles podcast. Even early, because they were catching the ball. The receivers and the running backs, everybody deserved credit. There was a pass early in the game where Tofili caught it. It was behind him, had to wait. In the NFL, that ball was going the other direction.
Yeah.
Ended up being a 20-some yard play. Against Miami, against Louisville or NC State, some other teams, that ball is probably going the other way. Tech's defense is solid, but they don't have a number 1 draft pick in their secondary. And Florida State's receivers weren't gaining much separation. Running backs were the key guy. That's not a good sign. Tight ends didn't get a whole lot of play for Florida State in terms of catching the ball. The ball was weighed a lot. That throw out there to Cam where he dropped it, had to turn all the way around. You lead that dude. I've watched him play for 4 years in high school. He's going to truck somebody, throw it way behind him. They end up punting. Like, they just shot themselves in the foot over and over. It's not accurate enough.
Yeah.
There's no substitute for lack of accuracy. Kenton's a D lineman by trade, and he knows that. There's no way around this. If he doesn't get more accurate, and I know we're going to talk about this in some capacity, the confidence for DJ is what I've been talking about on the last couple of shows. I think it showed in how the play calling was, because until that last drive, and kudos to him, Kenton mentioned it, those were money shots on 4th down. Those were great throws. But as Kenton also pointed out, name another one. There were a couple that were at least pretty good, but those 2 were the ones you're like, okay, that's an NFL throw. And they were at the right time, but why did it take to the 4th quarter? So a lot of question marks.
Well, yeah, and to what you're saying, it really didn't look like Mike Norvell as a play caller has a lot of faith in his quarterback. Everything was behind the sticks, Brian, and until they desperately, needed to drive final drive of the game when DJ did have a couple of good throws, really the only good throws he threw all day, but it didn't really look like Norvell had a plan B when the power running game wasn't working.
That is the biggest concern. Forget which writer it was. I just did a pod where I went through all the different writers, like things they brought up. And somebody said that, like, hey, they just thought they were just going to punch him in the mouth and run play action as they saw fit. Now, we all probably thought that too.
I think that was my guy, Max Chadwick from PFF.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Max brought that up. I commented on that on X. It's like, I'll add to it. There's some other things here. Accuracy, talking about the receivers, but then the offensive line. Like the O-line, I don't know what was going on in the second quarter, Kenton. If you'd have been up there, how many sacks would you got, man? Right tackle was spinning, bro. He was spinning.
Hey, listen, and this is why this game is so concerning for me if I'm Florida State, because it's not just that you lost and it was a moment where Georgia Tech played their best game and they fired on all cylinders and everything they did, it was just like your DBs were in position and he tipped it and the guy catches it and goes on. It wasn't that type of game. Like that, the fact that their offensive line and defensive line were supposed to be where Florida State eats this year. Those were supposed to be the positions where it's like, hey, if I don't know nothing else about this team, top 5 defensive line nation, offensive line that they got, everybody said they stole Florida's best lineman Everybody said, hey, they ran through the transfer portal and put together a lot of great guys when they ravaged Bama after Saban left. And lo and behold, they didn't just get beat up front. They got dominated. They looked at times completely out of sorts. And it wasn't like Georgia Tech is bringing a million exotic blitzes. They were saying, man for man, let's see what's going on. Let's see who's the better man. And more often than not, it was the folks with the GT on their helmet. The Rambling Wreck was getting it done.
I don't have anything to add to that because it's just true. It's time to circle the wagons or it's going to be a long season. They got, by the way, don't take it lightly, and they probably won't now. A week from Monday, they got BC. Remember last year when Boston College almost beat Florida State? That same guy, Thomas Castellanos, still plays quarterback for the Eagles, and he ran for over 1,000 yards. After seeing Haynes King, if that doesn't prepare you for him, then I can't help you. They better have a great week of practice. Because if they screw around and lose in Doak, go 0-2, y'all need to tune into my podcast.
Well, you should do that anyway. And let me ask you this, Brian, because you talk to Seminole fans every day, and we all know college football fans can be prisoners of the moment, right? Florida State had won that game. They'd be, getting ready for a national championship. They lose that game. How are the fans reacting now, Brian? And how have some of the season record predictions maybe changed before and after that Georgia Tech game?
On my X handle that I have for the pod, Locked On Seminoles, I put up a prediction. There's only 4 options you can use on X. I did 8-4, 9-3, 10-2, and 11-1. Running away with it is 8-4. Wow. Running away with it. Now, this is a Florida State handle. It's not my personal handle. The Locked On Seminoles pod. I was like, okay. I was surprised by that. I thought it'd be 10-2 or 9-3. I was dead wrong. So there's been an about face. Because before the season, any fan that came on to like the Locked On Seminoles YouTube channel, if they said, I don't care if they said, the sky was blue, they hammered them. They have, I'll give them credit for, pointing it out like, hey, we got problems, but I didn't think they'd go 8-4.
Wow. Well, fascinating stuff. And you guys should check out Locked On Seminoles. And also Brian Smith is I call him the recruiting overlord on the Locked On Network. He does awesome recruiting segments with me on Locked On Canes, with us here on Locked On ACC. So make sure you check him out all over the network. Brian, thank you so much. And I'm sure you have an interesting week of shows coming up. So enjoy that.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Oh, great stuff there by Brian Smith. You got to love it. Got to love the recruiting overlord. All right, my friends, we have a lot more to talk about on this episode of Locked On ACC because guess what? It wasn't just a Florida State loss. It was also a Georgia Tech win. You want to talk about starting off very well in the Atlantic Coast Conference? The Yellow Jackets just did that. How did they manage to put on a masterclass in Dublin? You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. And I'm only getting started with Locked On, with Ultimate College Football HC. And we love them here on the Locked On Network. Guys, this is an addictive game. If you're a Florida State fan and you want to try to, make up for what happened on the field on Saturday, why don't you win some trophies in Locked On in Ultimate College Football HC? Guys, in this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of your favorite ACC team? From recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about Ultimate College Football HC. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but it will also shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On ACC fans. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure you check out Locked On College Football. I know the recap that Spencer McLaughlin did with Brian Smith also joined him. It's been going viral, talking about that Florida State loss or that Georgia Tech win, because we are going to talk about what the Yellow Jackets did to come away with a W. So make sure you check out Locked On College Football. Like our show, it's free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's free on YouTube. Kenton Gibbs. So, Kenton, you called it. We were having a text conversation during the game when it was starting to get really close. And I'm thinking, man, if Georgia Tech can pull this off, they're going to get a lot more national respect. And then you responded to me, or are people just going to be dogging Florida State and not giving Georgia Tech the credit? I feel like it's playing out that way. And I get it. You've got a top 10 team that was favored by almost 2 touchdowns that goes down to open the season. More of the focus is going to be on what went wrong for Florida State versus what went right for Georgia Tech. But I'd like to think that Brent Key and defensive coordinator Tyler Santucci, they deserve respect here.
Absolutely. But it's again, the way that this thing happened, Georgia Tech's thing is supposed to be Haynes King flinging it around the yard. It's supposed to be him throwing for 300 some odd yards. It's supposed to be him getting everybody involved. It's supposed to be Haynes next to him doing a couple special things in the passing game and the running game, being this dual threat running back. That's how it's supposed to be. That was the alleged script for Georgia Tech coming in. And lo and behold, Brent Key said, not so fast, my friend. In the words of a guy who got pretty famous down there in the Sunshine State. So I'm understanding of why people are not giving Georgia Tech their credit as much as blaming Florida State. But I'll be damned if we don't give them their credit on this show, because the complete 180 that run defense has done needs to be, listen, that is not only Santucci. He put up a hell of a scheme, absolutely. They drew up the run blitzes at the right time and all that, absolutely. But those players are the ones that got to put on their big boy britches and stop the run. And they showed up and showed out across the board. And I'll tell you what, this performance by Georgia Tech, I don't care what Florida State's season ends up being. This performance by Georgia Tech should be seen as an absolutely amazing one, because, again, you look at this thing, and I always say that the fighters don't make fights, the styles make fights. And you're looking at two teams where one wants to power run, one struggled to stop an inside zone by the Island of Misfit Toys Community College last year. And the team that was the one that struggled stopped the power run, did not allow for any play action type of deals to come off of it. And I'm sorry I'm stuttering so much today, but it's hard to even get out. It's hard to process what I just saw fully. So Georgia Tech, hats off to the guys in Atlanta. Hell of a game. Way to do what they do. I mean, I'm sure they partying on Peachtree right now, because those gentlemen did what they were supposed to do, plus some.
I mean, Kenton, Florida State averaged just over 5 yards per play. It was 5.2 yards per play, which was crazy. And you talked about the 2 running games. Florida State gave up 190 rushing yards to Georgia Tech. Florida State only rushed for 98 team yards. Prior to the game, wouldn't we have thought it would probably be 3 times that Florida State would probably be closer to 300 rushing yards than 100?
And that's why, and again, that's why Georgia Tech needs their credit and needs their love, because it is no, first thing first, the offensive line that we talk about at Florida State, they were touted as a very good group, but the backfield, even when you go past Toffoli, we all know that DJU is going to struggle at times throwing the ball. We all know that. However, with his legs, that man is 6'4" and some change, 250 pounds. And he couldn't do anything on the ground. I'm telling you right now, that team did some special things. They deserve all the love, because, again, you talk about how we expected it to be flipped and all that. But how flipped did we expect the actual players to look on the field? Right. Because we all knew Georgia Tech was going to have more juice and more energy to start. But it wasn't about the start, because in my mind, I'm like, Georgia Tech has more to prove. They'll come out with more of that hunter's edge of this is the champ. We got to take him down. The energy part wasn't what concerned me. It was just the fact that even after that initial, weathering the storm, tied 14-14 at half, Georgia Tech came out and was still the better team. Yeah. The score was 0-0 at halftime, brand new ball game. And Georgia Tech still found a way to win, still found a way to physically move Florida State against their will, still found ways to make DJ Lundy look. The young man was in the blender. And I don't like calling out players, but objectively speaking, you're showing up and paying all the respect and all the due diligence to Florida State. And Georgia Tech says, we got some ball players too. We got some big guys too. We got some big uglies too that can get it done. Man, what a game.
And the significance of this being a conference game where, so not only is Florida State 0-1, and obviously, like, theoretically, all their goals are still in front of them, right?
Yes,
like, one loss doesn't eliminate you from the playoff, especially a 12-teamer. One loss doesn't eliminate you from ACC championship game, but it is significant because Florida State, not only are they 0-1, they're 0-1 in the ACC, and Georgia Tech is now 1-0 in the conference. So how much does this shift your expectation on how the ACC might play out? You remember a couple of the things that we were talking about on the show last week, Kenton. You remember there was that one of the writers from CBS Sports said that one of his hot takes was that Georgia Tech was overrated heading into the season. I think he's probably going to walk that one back. And then the other thing, I want to give some credit here. You and I weren't really buying. Admittedly, we were both wrong. We thought Florida State would cover what ended up being a 10.5 point spread. Like we were wrong about that. Yeah. However, we did bring up the fact that the Sharps were actually putting in all the money, all the big money they were putting in on Georgia Tech. They actually moved the line from Florida State -13 to Florida State -10.5. So maybe it's time to give credit to the wise guys as well, because they knew what they were doing.
Absolutely. But also, let's give a little bit of credit back to ourselves, because we were wrong about this game in particular. But I want anybody who has watched this show, who's going to call us everything but children of God, I want y'all to go back and tell me what me and Donno both said about the ACC and how wide open it is this year.
Yeah.
We both said that. Neither one of us said, hey, it's Florida State and everybody else. It's Florida State and Clemson and everybody else. It's Louisville and everybody. We both agreed this is a wide open ACC. We just didn't know how wide the floodgates would be, because Georgia Tech, as of now, is the front runner in the ACC, and everybody's trying to catch up. And the next time they'll be an underdog is most likely against Louisville in about a month. And they got 4 games between now and then. So, this is, I'll tell you, this is quite the development, quite the game. And this could have not only ACC relevance, but national relevance in terms of the things that happened in Dublin, Ireland on Saturday night.
Now, coming up next, concerns over SMU. Is it too much of a prisoner of the moment thing? Because Kenton, they look shaky in their season opener. We'll get to that and so much more. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Want to welcome 5 Hour Energy to the Locked On Podcast Network. Are you tired after lunch? I always am. You're not alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit the wall after lunch. Let a 5 Hour Energy shot help you leap over the wall instead of crashing into it. With zero sugar and a convenient, portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your door. I love that. Guys, if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today. You can use our promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid till September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. He's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. So the SMU Mustangs, now a member of the ACC, they are 1-0, Kenton. That's the good news. They needed late game heroics from Preston Stone, their quarterback, and RJ Maryland, their top receiver, who had a big game, 8 receptions for 162 yards and a touchdown, to beat the Nevada Wolfpack on the road. Nevada were nearly 4 touchdown underdogs in this game, Kenton, and they almost put it off. SMU looked very shaky, but they got the job done. Am I overreacting when I say I'm not so sure they're ready for ACC play this year?
Not at all, because this is the exact antithesis of the Florida State game. The things that were supposed to be SMU's Achilles heel were their Achilles heel. Everybody said, in the trenches, are they good enough to hold up in the ACC? That was the question. How will they look in terms of being physical with the teams in the ACC as opposed to the American Conference? Donald, just off the top of your head, how many yards per rush do you think SMU average?
Well, I already know. So if I tell you, am I cheating? Like the three yards per rush.
You're technically wrong. 2.9.
Oh, you got me. Okay.
2.9 yards per rush. This is insanity. Listen, I have told people, and I stick consistent on this with SMU. I think that they're good enough to play spoiler to certain teams in the ACC. 1,000%.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. At the end of the season, teams will sleep on them and they will catch them slipping. Do I think this team is good enough to contend? Not right now. Not right. Love me some Rhett Lashley. Love me some Preston Stone. Love me some RJ Maryland. I don't think that they are at the level right now. And that's not me saying, oh, I was all in on them and then this game. No, if anything, this is more of a confirmation bias moment for me, because I suspected that they weren't there. And this game would just say, yeah, they're not. They're not.
So safe to say, stock considerably down on Florida State, stock considerably up on Georgia Tech, and stock way down on SMU right now, despite the fact that they are 1-0. And I saw a couple people like on social media saying, well, you should know that SMU, they're going to struggle a little bit now that they're in a Power 4 conference. But what does that have to do with Nevada? I mean, Nevada has nothing to do with the ACC.
A 2-10 Mountain West team should never have you out here like that. That's just, again, shout out to the late game heroics from Preston Stone and RJ Maryland. Shout out to them. All the love in the world. This is no disrespect. This is not to say, hey, they're a terrible unit, anything like that. If anything, you say stock way down on SMU. My SMU stock, in my estimation, my valuation of them would be exactly the same leaving that game as it was coming in. Because to me, if you play the role of spoiler, just the same that you have games where you'll be fantastic and you'll be the team that you shouldn't, there will be one or two where you look terrible and you either lose to a team that you shouldn't, or it's going to be way too close for comfort when it shouldn't be, which is what we saw Saturday night. That's what I feel like it was here. So me personally, yes, Georgia Tech stock through the roof for me. Florida State stock is taking a nosedive. SMU stock holding steady right where I thought it would be. Y'all are going to be spoilers at best. At worst, it's a tough year. You got to adjust. Take your lumps, just like with relegation and promotion. Teams who get promoted are most likely to be relegated because that's just what it is.
Well, week 0 was nuts. I wonder how many twists and turns week 1, where there's going to be a lot more games week 1, how crazy that's going to be. We'll continue to preview that all week long. We're also, Kenton, going to have on our next episode the season debut of He Said, She Said, The Fans Said. And I don't know how many people were on top of that Georgia Tech upset, but I would imagine most of us and most of the fans are going to be eating some crow this week.
Yes, sir. Everybody starts off 0-1, but don't worry. We'll be back next week. All of the games will be uploaded by the time you hear this. Every single game for week 2. If an ACC team is involved, it will be up. So we're going to talk about it next episode, but get in there. and get your votes in. Your vote matters here on Locked On ACC, baby.
Yeah, follow at Locked On ACC on X. Huge shout out to Kenton Gibbs. Huge shout out to Brian Smith for joining us. I'm sure his shows are going to be doing very well this week, but it's going to be wild after that upset loss for Florida State. And we'll talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.